But when the revolution came, a lot of the proponents of uniform manufacturing had to get the hell out of France because they were on the wrong side, and they ended up coming to the United States. One of them was a guy named Louis Toussard, who was often said to be one of the founders of West Point. But he was also a proponent of this idea of uniformity, system uniformity, order. Just about in that, they became the mantra of the French and surely of American Army officers who picked up on that idea and ran with it, and really succeeded in a major way. So the Army Ordnance Department here is important because they're the ones that, buy into this idea, and they're the ones who go to the National Armories and say, okay, you're up first, you're going to do this. And thank God there were superintendents at Springfield. I can't quite say the same for Harper's Ferry, but at Springfield, Roswell Lee did buy into it and began to press at his workers to, adopt gauges, develop new machinery, to pursue this elusive goal of uniformity. This armory produced over 805,000 guns during the war. 805,000, that's during the war, as it had for many years before. The Springfield Armory had been the place where contractors had their arms inspected. And it turns out that during the war, since Harper's Ferry was out of business, that basically all the main private contractors for rifle muskets, which was the mainstay of the Union Army during the war, had their guns pretty much inspected by Springfield people. Not all, can't be all, but most. And I wanted to give you some examples about how Springfield's interaction with these private contractors worked and why that in itself is very significant, because again, it points to the significance of this armory as one of these pivot points of American industry. And the first example I want to give you is the case of Barton Jenks, who is the son of Alfred Jenks, Jenks and Son Machine Works in Bridesburg, Philadelphia. Manufacturers of textile machinery, not gun makers. Old man Jenks had been a protege of Samuel Slater. Came from Rhode Island, moved to Philadelphia, and set up a very profitable business, making first-class textile machinery. The war comes and they take a contract for rifle muskets. Never been in that business before. And they end up producing 98,000 of these things during the war over a 3.5-year period or so. Very impressive. How did they do that? They did it because Barton Jenks, who was the son, when they took the contract, immediately got in touch with the master machinist, Cyrus Buckland, here at the Springfield Armory. There's a great set of papers at the Hagley Museum on this subject. That's one of the finds I made in doing the research, is that there are Barton Jenks papers at the Hagley Museum that have this detailed correspondence between Cyrus Buckland of Springfield and Barton Jenks. And I mean, in this correspondence, Cyrus Buckland provides him with information about the sequences involved in machining every component of the rifle, the sequences involved in heat treating parts of the rifle, methods of paying workers per piece. But there are other gun makers in the valley who played an extremely important role in disseminating these new gun-making technologies around the gun-making industry and beyond that to sewing machine manufacturers. I mean, one of the earliest commercial products made with gun-making technology was the sewing machine. In my class, I always say, well, what was the first product made with armory practice? The firm of Lamson, Goodnow, and Yale was located up in Windsor, Vermont. They were the successors to Robinson Lawrence, that very same company that won recognition at the London Crystal Palace exhibition. And they were first-rate machinists, first-rate gun makers. Six of their model 1841 rifles were displayed in London at the Crystal Palace and won medals for the excellence. I've seen one of those guns. It's beautiful. I've never seen such precise machine work. I know they were specially made for the occasion. They must have been. They just looked too damn good, But in any case, Robinson Lawrence made very fine products. Well, they went bankrupt in 1856, and that property was bought up by a cutlery firm from here in Massachusetts, Shelburne Falls, isn't it? Yeah. Shelburne Falls, yeah, Lamson Company. And so they take over, and at the time of the war, they were manufacturing sewing machines up in Windsor, but the war comes, and old man Lamson I'm told, was an avid abolitionist. This little company up in Windsor was supplying machine tools of all types, including gun stocking equipment, but milling machines and forging machines, all sorts of stuff, to virtually every important gun maker in America, perhaps except Colt. I can't remember Colt's in that list, but Remington was there. I have a list here I can read off to you. Smith & Wesson, Volcanic, all the important Sharps, all of these important gun makers were buying machinery from Lamson. It reads like a who's who of American gun making. They were selling so many machines to all of these different firms.
To help figure out what's a better way to make this piece of either machinery or a final commercial product. Bicycles, motorcycles. At one point in Springfield, there's a Rolls-Royce factory. Those of you that know the history know that. You can go to the Museum of Springfield Industry and actually see Rolls-Royces made in Springfield in the museum. Airplanes were made here for a while. I mean, there was a host of stuff. And in many instances, those factories used machinery made up and down the river valley. This I love. This is from a really important book on the history of tool making by a guy named George Wickham Rowe called English and American Tool Builders. So this is the region that we're talking about. And this is what happens between 1982 and 1990. And again, if you're from around here, you've lived through this, but maybe to some extent or another, you've forgotten how quickly this skill base that we're talking about disintegrated. I mean, that's devastating to the regional economy. And I would submit that this region still hasn't completely figured out how to recover from this. That this rapid loss of so many well-paying, skilled jobs really took the lifeblood, in a way, out of the regional economy. After the Bosch closed, I should say, I worked for a few years in Springfield in something that was at the time called the Machine Action Project, which was trying to figure out how to get these jobs back, and as well how to figure out how to work with smaller metalworking firms, of which at that time in 1989, 1990, we did a survey, and in about a 25-mile radius of where we were sitting this morning, there were some 350 small metalworking companies, precision shops, averaging 10, 15, 20 workers, doing really high-skilled stuff, medical devices, subcontracts for aerospace, all sorts of things. But when you look at this, what happened in the 50s and the 60s is that a lot of these firms, the images of which I already showed you, started being bought up by outside conglomerates. And so Textron, one of the major ones, Bendix, another one, they bought up a lot of these companies. They had no knowledge inside their own corporate ranks of anything to do with building machinery or precision metalworking more generally. They bought them in the merger and acquisition mania that comes and goes in the United States.
Within that valley, Hartford is very important. A lot has happened there. And so if you'd like to learn more about it, I'd be pleased if I could see you guys at the museum, if you could check us out on the web. And I just thank you guys all for being here today. Thanks.
Who is the new face of advanced manufacturing here in the region? Because I think it's important to kind of put in context, watching the slides, and looking at kind of where we've been. Right now, the advanced manufacturing companies in the region here are primarily small and medium-sized enterprises. They are contract manufacturers. They're a part of a very, very competitive and shrinking supply chain, controlled by original equipment manufacturers, system integrators, prime manufacturers. And within that supply chain, these small companies, again, are being asked to do significantly more value-added work at reduced pricing. And within that context, they're being asked, obviously, because they don't, most of these companies do not have a product. They're parts makers, they cut metal. They have the luxury of having 6 vocational technical high schools and 1 comprehensive high school that all have a manufacturing training program for high school students.
Applications, one of the major projects to build CNC machinery was at MIT, and it was to build a machine that could contour a jet plane wing. And the machine would cost millions of dollars when it was finally developed. Whereas in Japan, they were basically trying to figure out how to hook controls up to the equivalent of like a Bridgeport lathe. And that was something that millions of, not millions, but hundreds of thousands of shops would buy, whereas the machine to do a wing, right? And so the proprietary nature of
goods the government wanted to buy. So when it went out of business, the government had no measuring stick about how much it really cost to produce an M16 rifle. And as a result, it cost them a hell of a lot more.